Hello, project people. You are listening to the soothing sounds of the Project Chatter podcast. I am your host, Val Matthews, and as always, I'm joined by my big man, Mr. Dale Fung.
Hey Val, hello folks. I hope everyone is doing really fantastic. Another really exciting pod. I'm excited for this one, Val.
I'm with you, Dale. Just a reminder too to our listeners to hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you listen to your good podcasts on, and our YouTube channel for the full podcast and our guest bonus Q&A. And if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, you can get in touch with us via our website, projectchatterpodcast.com. In this pod, we're joined by Dr. Alexia Nalewaik. How are you going there?
I am going well. How are you?
I am fantastic because I got your name perfectly right.
You did?
Hopefully. Yes. I'm working on it. It's great to have you on the pod. Obviously, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but before we get into the subject matter and topic of critical thinking and more, here is Dale with your bio.
Thanks, Val. So my turn to try and get Dr. Alexia Nalewaik's name correct, and I think I got it right there.
You did.
But yeah, Dr. Alexia Nalewaik has over 25 years of internationally recognized experience in audit, systemic risk, project analytics, governance, and cost estimating. She holds degrees, that's degrees with an S, in physics, civil engineering, and project management. Her focus on risk, stakeholders, transparency, and assurance continue to prove valuable to major clients in utilities, transportation, infrastructure, scientific facilities, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, and manufacturing. Wow. That's a mouthful for South African, and I'm glad I got through that. She is a professional lecturer at American University and the host of #PM Chat Weekly, and I believe that's on Twitter every week.
Yes, it is.
And we can chat about that and where people can get hold of you for that. And Dr. Alexia has written 2 books on project-related topics: Project Cost Recording and Reporting, and Project Performance Review, and we can touch on those as well, and published over 100 research papers and technical guidance. She is a fellow of FRICS Americas, AACE International, the Guild of Project Controls, and ICEC. She is a past president of AACE International and a past chair of ICEC. We are truly humbled and grateful to have you on the podcast, Dr. Alexia. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you feeling today?
I am doing well, and I am very happy to be here.
We are extremely happy to have you, and you're joining us. Is it from New Mexico today in the US?
Actually, no, I am joining you from just outside Washington, D.C.
Oh, Washington, D.C. That's right. Fantastic.
Snowy, AC. It's actually raining ice, which is not the same as hail.
Yeah. And you were threatened with some power outages, so thankfully that hasn't happened. And touch wood, that doesn't happen
yet, but we have another 7 hours of freezing rain and snow forecasted for today, so anything could happen.
Oh dear. But you did mention before we hit record, that you have done your risk assessments and you've got your hot water all stored up.
I have indeed. I've got my hot water, and I have select rooms in the house that have been heated a little more than usual, and yes, it's all good.
Fantastic. So our topic today: what critical thinking means for your project. And I do want to get into that. I know Val wants to as well, and I know Val, studying psychology at the moment, will want to tackle that from a psychology perspective as well. But there's all sorts of views and angles we can tackle that one at. Before I do, I want to sort of bring up some of your past endeavors that you sent through, which I want to touch on, which is fantastic. You were a long distance swimmer and you attempted the channel swim?
Yes.
Wow.
I swam the Catalina Channel, which is 22 miles, and it's the same distance as the English Channel. I attempted the English Channel. I swam for 13 and a half hours, and I was 2 miles short of the finish.
Ouch.
When the current changed and took me in the direction of Norway, I was packed all wrong for Norway.
Yeah, that's quite off course.
Incredible.
But that is amazing. That is amazing. And you also performed and recorded music, and you sang at the BBC Prom. Is that right?
Yes, yes, I did.
Wow. Wow.
Sang at the BBC Proms, and also performed at Covent Garden. At the time, I was living in London, and I was with the Brompton Oratory Junior Choir.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing.
Beautiful.
And, you know, not to stop there, you've recreated recipes and you've published cookbooks.
Yes, that was just like my PhD. That was an accident. My mom was notoriously difficult to shop for. And so I asked her one day what I should get her for Christmas. And she said, well, you cook so well and you have such good taste in recipes. Give me a cookbook. So I bought a cookbook. And then I, in true Virgo fashion, started obsessing about it, right? I've tried only 4 recipes in this cookbook. What if she chooses one and it's not very good? I mean, it would be disastrous, right? I mean, I'd never recover from giving her a bad cookbook. And so at the time, there was a service that came available that's no longer in existence, but it was called Tastebook. It was advertised in all the gourmet magazines as a way to collect family recipes and things like this. So I collected 100 recipes and uploaded them and, you know, put a cover on it and had it bound and published and printed and everything. Gave it to Mom, who started crying and, you know, was as happy as she could be. And then she sort of wiped her nose and her eyes and said, so of course you'll do this again next year.
No pressure.
By book 7, she started saying, you can stop now. Because the recipes were getting more and more bizarre because I was trying out I kept pushing the limit with techniques.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's one way to do it. No, that's fantastic. And I do want to touch on this because it's the first time I've heard of this, and I had to sort of Google it. And I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. Philomath. Is that how you pronounce it? Philomath?
Yes.
Can you
Philomath or Philomath, yes.
Yeah. Can you touch on what that is and what that means to those that the uninitiated like ourselves?
Well, a polymath is someone who knows how to do a lot of things, right? Polymath or a multi-hyphenate. But a philomath is actually someone who loves to learn, loves learning new things. And that's what I am. That's what my whole career has been. My whole career has been, ooh, that looks shiny. And then I go running off in that direction for some period of time and learn all about it and have a lot of fun, and I'm never bored. And then, you know, ooh, something shiny over there. So now it's a true love of learning.
No, that's fantastic. We love learning new words. I mean, we learn new words every single pod. So that's fantastic. Right, let's jump into it then. Critical thinking. So, I mean, where do we start with this? It's almost, you got to break it down and go, are we ever not critically thinking? Do we have to get into a space to think critically? Is it something you switch on and off? Is it a skill that you develop over time? Are there good examples you have of what it might look and feel like? So the whole host of things in there, Alexia, but I'd love just to give us your take on it and sort of open the envelope so we can explore this topic.
Sure. As a professor, critical thinking is something that I try to hammer home with my students, and like it or not, they're going to get a lecture on it, because I find when you say, isn't this something everybody does? I'm inclined to say, just as common sense is perhaps the least common thing, critical thinking is also, in my experience, not that common. People go for the easy answer, or you see this in teenagers who haven't yet quite developed. They're developing their personality. They're imitating their peers, right? So they'll have a tendency to sort of parrot something one of their friends said. And then when you ask, is that really what you think? And they go, So teaching teenagers, teaching students, teaching professionals to think critically and deeply is really, it's an essential skill, but it's also a complex skill. Now, I was taught, I don't know who, it was probably my father, could have been mom. They were both scientists. So from an early age, I was taught to ask is it 6 or 7 questions, right? Who, what, why, when, where, and how. Everything you come across, ask those questions, you should get a 360-degree perspective on it. And it turns out that's a critical thinking technique. It's just that nobody ever used the words critical thinking.
Right.
So critical thinking isn't about being critical. It's more about disciplined thinking.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Is that similar to reasoning, kind of the truth-seeking ethos that you've been set? And is that, I mean, there's a lot of things, I think the internet's kind of exploded with mistruths and misinformation and a lot of opinionated, articles and blogs. And I find one of the challenges, I think, for young people, and I've got kids as well, and I worry about their reason to basically take all that information and apply some level of criticality to it. Like, how do you then interpret all that information and get through it quickly? Can you go through everything and do that process? What's the shortcut to it, or is there a shortcut to critical thinking?
I don't know if there is a shortcut, but you are correct. It is reasoning. It is a form of reasoning. It really is a process, really, and especially in project management. Especially my core skill is as an estimator. So what do I need to do to be a good estimator? Right. I could look in my cost book and say, oh yeah, this is what a foundation costs, right? Or I could question assumptions, document all the background information. Even on occasion, I've questioned the design of something, right? Why are we designing the foundation this way? Why isn't it, well, why isn't it octagonal? Why is it square? Why is it this? Why is it that? And so it's a matter of professional responsibility to do one's due diligence and support conclusions, and then also consider the implications of everything that we've concluded.
Yeah, and do you find, I mean, on projects as well, sometimes they can get pretty emotive, and I think emotion can be a barrier to logic and reason and critical thinking, and sometimes it trumps logic and reason, and people go with their gut, or they go with how they feel about a project, particularly in the decision-making space. We see a lot of complex programs suffering from groupthink and really poor decision-making that, a bit like air crash investigations, you follow through the 7 symptoms and you find that the root cause was some really ill-informed decision-making. How can we overcome that? I mean, logic and reason sounds logical and reasonable. Why aren't all projects doing it?
And that's a good question. I think the answer is humanity. As humans, we are subject to bias, right? We are subject to our own perspective. And as you said, emotions often get in the way. So to be a good project manager or a good estimator or a good human being requires a certain amount of humility, a willingness to be wrong or to be questioned, and to not react emotionally, instead to react with a rational argument and facts. I think it's a good skill as a human being.
It's a fantastic skill, and I think I had a very similar upbringing where I think it was my grandfather was very similar to what you're saying your father was, where everything was about fact, and then he would actually break down the problem, and if there was an issue, be like, okay, so tell me what the real problem is. And I think he was inferring effectively or installing, if you like, this logical thinking, which is probably why I ended up in project controls, like engineering, because of that fact-finding ethos that's kind of driven into those specialties. To be an effective project controller, you really need to find out what's going on the project. To be an effective engineer, you really need to understand what the problem statement is you're trying to solve. So just being inquisitive around critical thinking. What you've done a lot of research papers. Have you done one on critical thinking in projects? And can you explain some of your best research papers? Perhaps I know you've got hundreds, but maybe have a talk about a few of those
papers. Goodness. Well, you did ask if there's a technique, and in addition to the one that I've employed since I was younger, something. Another is called the 5 whys. So for everything, you keep asking why until you've asked 5 times, and then hopefully you're at a lower level. Or it's possible that they say stop at 5, because if you've asked it 6 times, somebody's going to punch you in the nose. But
basically,
yeah. So it's a matter of delving down. But the five whys, constantly asking, what do you, perhaps you're asking somebody, what do you think about this? And then you say, why? Well, why that? Well, why that? And stop somewhere reasonable, one hopes. Oh, goodness. Favorite technical papers and favorite research. Some of my research has come about just out of necessity. Things that I've stumbled over in my career and wanted to fix or wanted to dive into more deeply, and then thought, gosh, somebody else might benefit from this. In some cases, I have paired up with researchers who had a question, and it happened that I had the data, which is a researcher's favorite thing. It's a person who has the data. or sometimes I come across something that annoys me. And I realized fairly early on that you can, when most people are annoyed by something, they brush it away, they ignore it, they walk away from it. And I started thinking, well, what would happen if I took things that annoy me and start picking them apart, pulling them apart, figure out why they bother me, and then see if there's a solution to that. So those have been my approaches to research and publications, and it's worked out quite well. Some of my recent publications, let's see, I did one on smart historic cities, which was fun. And I wrote it because I read so much in smart cities that speaks as if the cities are sprouting out of greenfield, right? They're coming out of nowhere, someplace where there's no city before. Yeah. Whereas reality is, if you're trying to implement a smart infrastructure within an existing city, you're going to come across all sorts of things, mostly infrastructure that is not ready for that technology. And individual owners of property, some might be ready to implement the technology, others might not, or might not have the money. So trying to implement smart cities and ensure equity, right? Try to avoid the digital divide within a city while implementing a smart technology is, it's going to be a big challenge. And a lot of this that you read about smart cities is sort of rah, look at all this can do, but they don't really tap into the realities. So I used a city on the East Coast as something of a case study, and literally ran around town, took photos of old buildings and showed what it looks like when new technology is implemented well, or perhaps less expensively, or not at all, and the sort of challenges that come up. So I'm quite proud of that. And then let's see, last year I was approached by Nigel Williams at University of Portsmouth regarding adding a module to my audit methodology, and we started talking about societal value in capital projects and what that means, whether it's quantifiable, what elements are qualitative, and how can large organizations or governments audit for that. So we've just finished a study of, gosh, 5 or 6 major telescope installations around the world in Australia, in Ghana, in Australia, and in South Africa, and took a look, also Puerto Rico and Chile, and took a look at the sort of value that comes from building a major capital project in a remote location.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm never bored.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And obviously, at the end of this pod, we can share where your practices and your technical papers are published, because I think there's a lot of value in sharing these discussions, and especially if they're based on critical thinking and reasoning and information and data. I mean, this is something we really want to push forward, because a lot of the time, there are institutions and they do have bodies of knowledge, but they are limited because they're effectively theoretical, and practical application comes through case studies and use cases and real problems in real countries, which is fantastic. So thanks, Alexia, for that. Dale, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Val. I was fascinated just listening there, and a whole bunch of things came out. You mentioned groupthink, Val. That's a very common thing, and we often believe that we're not part of groupthink, but it happens all the time. We were actually just chatting before we hit record, just Val and I, about psychology and how you don't think, or you think you know who you are, but you're not actually the way you see yourself is, and the way everyone else sees you, etc. And we think we're not influenced by various factors, but groupthink is one. Herd behavior, we've heard it called as well. And then when I was listening to what you're saying there, Alexia, I was thinking we had a podcast a few episodes ago around diversity, inclusion, and equality, and we're talking about diversity of thought. And so I thought, linking the two, I'm thinking, okay, well, if we can empower people with the right tools, maybe the 5 whys, or asking all the rounded questions, all of a sudden you get that diversity of thought, because you start including this variety of views. And I think that is part of it as well, of critical thinking. But I wanted to sort of bring in, you touched on data, and we love to talk about how technology is influencing our profession as well. And I then wondered, if we, as humans, if we find it so difficult, because as you say, there's emotion and all sorts of things, to change the way we think and behave, will technology then come into play and help and assist us with critical thinking to get that diversity and maybe it's not to replace us, as we always say, we don't ever think technology will fully replace humans, but maybe it's something to spur us on, to remind us, to instigate critical thought when we're delivering projects. Because as we know, every project is unique by its very definition. And so it's not a conveyor belt. So I've done this before, henceforth I can do this again. I need to always be thinking, even if the scope is set, requirements are set to a very granular detail, you still need to constantly be thinking, what am I missing? And that's where risk management comes in as well. So pulling that all together, I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. Technology, where do you stand with that and when it comes to critical thinking?
I think there is a lot of room for technology to assist humans in critical thinking and in analytics. I don't think we are there right now. I think a lot of what is currently considered to be intelligent technology or machine intelligence is really just data mining and identifying trends. It's not true intelligence, although I did see a news article that apparently 2 weeks ago, some MIT researchers got spinach to send them an email. Yeah. So
spinach.
Hey, what?
Like Popeye spinach.
Real spinach.
Really, right?
I was not expecting that.
But so I have a number of esteemed friends, and one of them is Genevieve Bell at Australian National University in Canberra. And she is right at that intersection between humanity and technology, and actually does a lot of speaking and research, and she has a whole school dedicated to this now. So researchers tapping into the ethics of technology and of machine intelligence, and of where is there a line, or should there be a line, or should there perhaps not be one, right? But how can we guide humanity to be our better and best selves?
Mm.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's fascinating because, I mean, we love to sort of always bring up our favorite, well, Val's favorite icon, Elon Musk, and Val would love to get the microchip in the head as soon as he can. But there is a line, I think. Well, it depends who you are and who you ask, right? On where that line is, and for different people, it's various distances, so to speak.
But going back to that question that you asked about diversity, one of the hallmarks of critical thinking as a skill involves encouraging consultation with others.
Yeah.
So that's part of doing your due diligence, getting information from others, encouraging dialogue, and then encouraging candor and critique in order to get to the best answer, which might not be your favorite answer.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think regardless of critical thinking, sometimes, you know, people don't want to know the bad story, regardless of whether you're critically thinking about it or not. If you just standard vanilla reporting and it's bad news, people just don't want to hear it, and they bury their heads in the sand.
On our recent publication, the one that Nigel and I did on societal value in projects, we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback about the portion of our paper and research that discussed how societal value is destroyed on capital projects, and then what is done about that. So we address not just societal value created, but we also addressed value destroyed, which a lot of researchers understandably choose to gloss over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. There's many factors where, I mean, we just in the UK, HS2, for example, you know, an additional runway at Heathrow. There's a lot of various factors. Talking about real life projects, though, do you have any examples where critical thinking has made a difference on real projects?
Ooh, that's okay. And I always laugh at people in interviews who say, "Gosh, that's a really good question." But that's a really good question, and I hadn't really quite considered that. I think I have seen perhaps the most bang for the buck in critical thinking in big pharma projects. And you can see that now with this whole push to develop vaccines and technology faster and in volume is going to lead to so many big changes for the industry, right? This isn't applicable just to now, this is applicable going forward. And there are so many lessons being learned right now, and a lot of them involve really disciplined thinking, applying logic, looking at things from multiple perspectives and saying, all right, what if we were to apply this knowledge here to this new situation? So I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. I think that's actually a pretty good example. I also saw it earlier. There was I don't know if it's still ongoing. I haven't heard talk of it recently because obviously, right?
They agree with you.
That would be the snowplow.
All right.
So at one point in time, the hot new thing was trying to develop a pharmaceutical plant that could fit on a tabletop. And these engineers were taking lessons learned and technology and methods from manufacturing, from food and beverage manufacturing, and trying and applying it. So rather than using multiple tanks, it would be one tank that could produce multiple products. And instead of having multiple phases for cooling and transfer and everything else, I worked on a bread facility once where I was endlessly fascinated by the machinery, because the bread would come out after being proofed, and then it needed a certain amount of time to rise, but they didn't just want it to sit still. So they had this coiled ramp that just did this at a very, very, very slow pace. And by the time the dough got to the bottom, it had risen.
Wow. And
then it could travel off somewhere else. So applying knowledge from other industries, being open to that input. Again, it's consultation, due diligence, and considering all angles.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think, the vaccine story is a very apt one, because and perhaps the speed at which they did that is why it's getting so much critique as well from the general public. It's like, how the hell could you approve it so quickly?
Yes, and they've been questioning all sorts of assumptions. The assumption that it takes a year and a half to do proper clinical trials. They're breaking barriers left and right now. Now, whether or not all of that sticks or is proven perhaps to not work, we'll see, won't we?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's interesting as well. I think there's something around human behavior and pressure, like something around, and this is maybe what project management works in a way as well on projects, is something about humans having a deadline and then working back from that. I'm sure, with your PhD and studying is the same thing. If you're cramming, something about a goal that's difficult and we want to endure and we want to overcome, seems to bring out, in most cases, it'll bring out the best in people to collaborate. And I think one of the things we saw is that cross collaboration, not just across industry, but across the world. And, I've got some family members that are scientists as well. And, obviously they're trained to be critical thinkers in general. And obviously there's a lot riding on that not working, and side effects and symptoms and all that. And, you're talking about human lives. And I think that adds some seriousness to the challenge, but then having access to everybody's research. Everybody's trying to endeavor. I mean, that's a big step forward in humanity. Like you said, that's a big change. That's a massive change, because usually this is proprietary information. It's owned by big pharma. Pharma doesn't like to share. We know this, but this is something that could ripple through all industries if we're ready and we're open. And we had Martin Paver on a previous podcast who's doing something similar around project problems and a hackathon, getting a real problem around data analytics. And then getting them to solve it in a few days, which would have normally taken, a general PMO or controls team probably forever or a few months. If we were on it a couple of days, probably 2 minutes, Dale. I don't know. But
absolutely itching to do a hackathon for project controls in the United States, because we
will hook you up. We will hook you up with Martin Paver after this. Martin, if you're listening, you need to speak to Dr. Alexia. He loves doing this stuff. He's very passionate about it. We're looking to kick it off in Australia as well. I think, again, this is something that we can all get behind, and we're all passionate about this subject matter. So, and we need critical thinkers in there. So you're perfect. The other thing I wanted to talk about while you're here is about the resistance of critical thinking, and how sometimes when we're promoting from a point of logic and reason and truth, and as you said, we're trying to have that candor and that open dialogue to collaborate to see if there's any other sides of the story or sides of the facts, which there generally isn't, because it's a fact, but it's good to have open dialogue about it. We are faced with resistance and pressure and politics from senior executives. We're talking about multi-billion-dollar projects, which Dale and I have been working on. We do find there is a resistance to accept. Do you know what's driving that, or is there a way to kind of circumnavigate that to make it easier for people to accept critical thinking on projects?
I'm sure there's an answer in there that involves make everybody part of the team and encourage open dialogue. I'm not necessarily certain it will have the desired effect on all stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot that goes on in multi-billion-dollar projects. There's the phase of getting them approved, and there is research that says that the mere process of getting very large projects approved and trying to get access to that pot of money requires almost necessarily understating the cost and overstating the benefit in order to make it politically palatable, which is how you get to these projects that are over budget on day one. So it's a matter of process. It's a matter of the way things are done. I don't think all stakeholders or even the general public are always, I think what I've seen with my own stakeholders on other projects is that they understand money on their own scale. And once you say, oh, this consultant is going to cost $500,000, they say, well, how is that possible? That's an unbelievable number, right? You should get them to do it for 1,000, something like this. So I found on very large projects, sometimes I was working with stakeholders to help them understand the very scale of the investment, the very scale of the project, because it just wasn't quite understandable to them. And so they had to be sort of handheld and brought along until they could really understand the language of the project and the context and the impact and all this. So a lot of stakeholders bring their own ideas and perspectives on a project. One of the other elements of critical thinking is actually called clarifying the question. Talking to the team or stakeholders to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Now, you run into this problem on IT projects. Everybody says, oh, we're going to create a computer game, but what that means to different people may not necessarily be the same. So clarifying the question, ensuring that everyone has the same vision and understands the details of what are being worked toward is actually an element of critical thinking. So if you have people pushing back against critical thinking, perhaps it's worth it to take them into it with baby steps. First step, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. And there's something to say around that process, as you mentioned. Critical thinking is a process. I like that. That really makes sense to me. And it's also about the quality of the questions as well. And I find that you're not, when you do these project management courses or university degrees, there is no subject matter that covers decision making, critical thinking and reasoning, logical assumptions. Because a lot of these mega programs, as you mentioned, not only are they challenged from a political and a financial perspective, but they're also challenged from a cultural and just the sheer size of them. And we're finding that like the mega projects, projects are getting bigger, and it's kind of counter-logical to think about that critically, because if you think that, well, in the last, like so 5 to 10 years, projects aren't getting better in terms of successful delivery. If you read any of the statistics, now I don't know how many of those are fact, because a lot of them are qualitative, they're not necessarily quantitative. But if you take it as okay, they're not doing too well, why are we making projects bigger? Wouldn't the counter solution be better, is to make projects smaller and more achievable?
There is definitely a school of thought that says breaking down projects or calling a very large project a program and then tackling it as elements is a good way to go. Another solution to that is the stage gate methodology, right? Going part way into the project and then taking the time to evaluate and say, are we on the right path? Do we get approval to go to the next phase? That's another approach. So I think project management world has been trying to develop various methodologies to solve that, but there hasn't been one guaranteed method. And I'm not sure we will ever get to a perfect method, because you have this chaotic element of humanity that's out there, right? It's a necessary part of your project.
Yeah, it's the dream of the universal theory of everything, right? I mean, if we could, we would. And there's so many different methodologies that, in the right situation, do justice. You know, the standard waterfall and the you know, the pinbox style of doing things, and then there's agile, and for various projects they have smaller kind of methodologies. They don't necessarily play well together either. And it would be interesting to see if anyone does come up, and maybe that's something for the hackathon, is there a methodology that would work that is going to take into some of these factors on mega programs? Because maybe mega programs need their own type of methodology, and maybe it is like you said, you split them up and you have time and space between stages to think about and reassess and have that critical dialogue and reset the future, rather than rebaselining a program every 6 to 12 months, because everything's out of whack.
Right.
Because and
I think that this agile versus waterfall divide is going to need to go away very quickly. And I keep trying to. I teach in the agile project management program at American University, and the reading materials sometimes push towards agile good, waterfall bad. And so I keep telling my students, don't just come out and say that in a project. That's not going to start you off very well. But if you look at the future and our reliance on technology and our increasing reliance on software, our world is rapidly moving to the point where many, if not most, projects will be hybrid, agile, and waterfall projects. And I've spent perhaps the past 6 months speaking to various software vendors in project management and saying, why can't you do both? What's the obstacle here to having true project management software that can handle a hybrid project? And there isn't much out there that can do that. You have agile software, you have waterfall software. They're not playing well together right now, but they're going to need to. The more we rely on technology and software, the more we're headed for hybrid projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, Dr. Dan Patterson's listening out there, and a few others. But I think there's
Dan's a friend of mine. I think I have he keeps saying, we need to touch base. We need to touch base. When can we chat? And I've been busy, so I should get on that.
That's it. We'll organize a call. Dale, over to you, mate.
Thanks. Yeah, no, we'll get you both on for the same pod. Maybe that's where you have your call and you can share thoughts. Val and I will just sit back and listen and just enjoy it.
Has he ever told you about his museum of computer technology in his office?
No.
Oh, he has all sorts of machines. It's
wow.
fabulous.
There we go. We'll ask him about that.
Let's get a tour. One.
Yeah,
let's get the tour.
Exactly. No, it's fascinating though. Listening to all of that, I was beginning to think, okay, so we've gone into, okay, what is critical thinking? Some techniques about how you can go about sort of perhaps upskilling yourself, those around you, trying to think critically, the different techniques and tools. Spoke about how technology could potentially help with that. But then I'm thinking, okay, now we've got all of this data and we're thinking critically, what do we do with it? Like, it's there. We've asked all these questions. We've got all these different views. We've asked all the whys. So we take that data, and then what do we do with it? Because how do you then sift through it and go, what's right, what's wrong? Is it then again hearts and minds, or is there some sort of binary way to get to it and get the best solution? Is there the next step beyond critical thinking?
I think there is room in our world for intuition. Another word that I use for intuition is just experience.
Right.
If you've been burned by this before, your intuition says it might happen again, something like that. So there is room for intuition alongside critical thinking. But one hopes that with a disciplined thinking process and with a disciplined decision-making process that is rigorous, that hopefully you'll get to either the right answer or an answer that will do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, regardless of critical thinking or not, whether you have that behavior on your project or in your team or not, I think today people still struggle with data and what they do with it, because we're actually data rich and knowledge poor. We don't know what to do with it.
Becoming so much more data rich. You look at the technology we have now for capturing data. You look at, we have moved from, in the observatory world, in the telescope world, they've moved from real-time observations to continuous observation.
Wow.
That is a data stream. You couldn't sift through that if you tried by hand. You just could not. So increasing reliance on technology, increasing reliance on what we're calling AI, but isn't, for pattern recognition or for stripping out noise. All this work can be taken over by computers. But you're right. As the more Internet of Things we have, and the more we're implementing real-time continuous capture of data, it's going to be not a question of how much data do we need, but identifying what we don't need and where that noise is.
Yeah, and hopefully we not only develop the technology to sift through that, but also be able to consume it and understand as human beings. Because I think that's the other trick, right? It's great we can develop technology that helps us, but then, you know, what do we do with that information?
Right.
But that's fascinating. I wanted to shift gears slightly, but before I do, was there anything else on critical thinking that you wanted to touch on before we move on?
No, that's about it. I just think I think that critical thinking is a key characteristic of being a responsible project manager. I think we have an obligation in our professional integrity to apply critical thinking, but it's not something where you can just wake up one morning and boom, you're a critical thinker, right? You take baby steps, you try new things, you become comfortable with humility, and eventually you get there. I believe, I think there are 5 or 6 phases of maturity and critical thinking, which I don't know if anybody ever hits level 6. Maybe Socrates, I'm not sure.
Perhaps. So I wanted to chat a little bit about PM chat and what you do there, because I know it's weekly, is it? And it ranges in terms of every week at what you speak about. And the reason I wanted to go down that path is because we're in the business of, it's not business, but we're in the business of sharing information. And the more access we can get to people like yourselves and others out there, we want to explore that as well. So I wonder if you could just share with us and the listeners a little bit more about that.
Right. And as you said, you are in the business of sharing information. Nobody ever said a business had to be profitable, right? So yes, we're all in that business. I think people like us have an altruistic bent and an understanding that information is not for the few or for the clique. It should be shared. It should be for the betterment of the profession. So PM chat is what used to be called a tweet up or a Twitter chat. So anybody can join. It's free. You can just search the hashtag PM chat and pull up parts of conversations on past topics, or you hopefully by pulling up, typing in hashtag PM chat, you will see what our next topic will be next week and the time and date to show up on Twitter. And this group has been going for 10 years.
Wow.
So we're coming up rapidly on the 10th anniversary of PM chat. I joined in 2012. I must have been one of the first people. I had just joined Twitter and I was desperately typing in project management, estimating, project controls, quantity surveying, just to see if anybody out there was talking on Twitter. And in the course of doing that, I learned that Twitter is what you make of it. What you get out of Twitter is a function of who you follow and who you interact with. So if people say Twitter is just a bunch of people yelling at each other, I say, well, get rid of the people you're following and follow somebody else. So
yeah,
my Twitter feed is almost entirely built environment, risk management, large projects sort of stuff. And I include in there audit and major agencies and a bunch of professional societies and data scientists and all sorts of cool stuff. Now, PM Chat alternates between being led by someone like me, who's a fairly regular host and trying to keep this ball rolling, and then guest hosts. So we've had the incoming president of RICS. We've had, I think Dan Patterson has agreed to come on at one point and host. So we get, you reach out to people and people you respect and ask, hey, would you like to ask 8 to 10 questions of the general public and see what random answers you get? Sure, you'd love to do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we pick the speaker generally picks a topic and they come up with 8 to 10 questions and dole them out over the course of an hour, and anybody in the general public, but more often a dedicated few, show up, jump in and answer questions and pull the conversation in all sorts of places you never thought it would go. And yeah, it's quite a community. It's a
after 10 years, there must be quite a bit of data on probably some really valuable questions. How do you get access to that? And have you been, what's the theme out of those data sets?
We have it and we are playing with it.
Nice.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Yes.
Is that a new paper?
Yeah, we'll wait for the publication.
Bigger than that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 10 years is a lot. And if you're doing, so it's every week, 10 years,
Yes.
And 10 questions, did you say?
8 to 10 questions.
8 to 10 questions.
Sometimes if it's a really feisty crowd, you only get 5 questions asked.
Yeah.
And I think one of our guests last week was it this week? Gosh, this week went so fast. Alan Muse, who's head of built environment at RICS. And he said, this is so fun. You have sort of theoretical, you have the theoretical people, and then you have these others who are very sort of not theoretical, and the two groups were going back and forth on the topic of I think it was adequate decision making in project management. And so you had the theorist versus the practicalists, and it was quite a fun little tussle.
To be honest, Alexia, Dale and I are completely hopeless at Twitter. We have talked about it, but we are on there, but we've never actually really understood how to use it. But I think you've explained it perfectly. So for anyone who's listening, who's never been on Twitter, find a nice, friendly environment and follow those that you like. Obviously, I think Twitter gets a lot of flack negatively because of the stuff that happened to Trump and all this other thing that it gets politicized a lot. But it makes sense if you're going to have a category like PM Chat and you're going to have 8 to 10 questions that are relevant and you want public opinion, and that's a great kind of an open square to talk about things, have dialogue, discuss. What are some of the best questions that you've heard, or some of the best responses maybe that have come back that just make you chuckle or have live in your head rent free?
In fact, when I first joined Twitter, I was, again, looking for people to follow and to engage with. And I wanted also to choose people to follow who challenged my way of thinking. I didn't want to just be in my own self-affirming bubble. And so key to this was picking people that I could really have sort of a rollicking discussion with. And so my co-conspirator, Andrew Ball, he's in the UK. And he had come on as a guest host on the topic of audit. And I had just published my first book. And I proceeded to absolutely ream him on Twitter. And at the end of it, he said, that was the most fun discussion I've had in years, and I think we're going to be the best of friends. So that's an example of a guy who has not just smarts, but humility, and says, I like having somebody as a foil that I could really have a good discussion with, instead of just yes men and people agreeing. So and so I started out, I think, with a bit of a bang on Twitter. We had a fun discussion about the COVID vaccine rollout. That was last week. We were discussing, if you were in project managing this effort, what would you do? Or what project management skills have we seen evidence of? We've seen evidence of strategy. We've seen some evidence of logistics. And so we started identifying project management skills that we've seen, and then trying to identify skills we haven't seen. Now that's another piece of critical thinking as well, that the hallmark of a good estimator is not just to take the list of what's on your project and put a price to it or a cost to it. The hallmark of a good estimator is asking what's missing, or how do you build that? Not just is it a foundation, but how much rebar is in that? What sort of aggregate? What sort of concrete? How is this designed? Do you need waterproofing? Do you have, is it a flat land, or do you need to have some sort of piers or something? It's that constant push to see what's not mentioned. And that's one of the hardest things in critical thinking, in project management, is not just talking about what's there, but identifying those gaps, identifying what you don't know. It's easy to run with what you do know, but being able to sit back and really think, and if that means lying down on the floor and staring at the ceiling, or having a glass of wine, or going for a swim and just letting your brain run, that every person has a process, I think, for being able to say, okay, but where am I not trying hard enough? Where is that gap? What's the blind spot? What have I not seen?
That's bang on. Yeah, that's fantastic. Is that what you think about when you're swimming? I was just going to ask you.
I solve so many problems when I'm swimming.
So the long swims because they're big problems. Is that right?
Exactly. Long swims, big problems. And I have come out of the pool with entire papers written in my head. I have come out of the pool with problems solved. I have had staff members say, "You're cranky, will you please go for a swim?" And I've had co-authors say, "Look, Alexia, either we need to have you drink a couple glasses of wine or throw you in the pool, but one way or another, we need to get that hamster wheel running. So perhaps the easiest choice is just to get you in the pool." So it's probably like running, except I'm not the sort that runs. You couldn't pay me to. So, but you talk to runners and they say they hit this zone where they feel like they can run forever and their brain is free to contemplate all sorts of stuff. And that's where I get. I prefer being in the ocean though, because I do have an unfortunate tendency to think too hard and then run into a wall. I have broken my nose in the pool.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Deep thinking. Fantastic. Oh, that's great. Dale?
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. When you're touching on Twitter and the debate and all that kind of thing, it reminded me of the debate we had in previous seasons. And, the guests we had on, they didn't know whether they were going to argue for or against a specific topic, and that it might have been against what they actually felt. And it was so fascinating because you could literally hear and feel them challenging their own thinking. But that was also a form of critical thinking, because you're trying to get the opposite perspective to what you're thinking. And very similar to what you were saying, some of them knew each other, but a lot of the guests hadn't met each other before. And they came out really enjoying it, that they had a really decent conversation with sort of like-minded peers, but then challenged themselves in a environment that wasn't sort of adversarial, so to speak. It wasn't, negative. It was a positive debate. So there was a lot of fun when we did that too. But this brings us to another bit of fun and a great part of our podcast, a feature that we brought in for this season, Dr. Alexia. It is called Defend the Indefensible.
No.
Yeah. And so for this section, Mr. Martin Curriston, who is our in-house guru or in-house general counsel, in-house oracle. If you're there, Martin. There you are. Welcome, Martin. Thanks for popping up. Take yourself off mute, and please, would you mind taking Alexia through Defend the Indefensible?
Yeah, thank you, Dale. So it's something that we've created for season 3 of the pod. It's a little bit of fun. It's something that's inspired by some of the brilliantly ridiculous things that we've all heard over the years. I'm sure you've heard quite a lot in your field on this subject. So it's where each of our guests defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. So if you're willing, if you're keen, let's make a start.
I am willing. I am a big fan of games. In fact, one thing that's just killing me right now with lockdown and COVID is that I haven't been able to host my usual game nights, so that I have 20 people show up and take over a bunch of tables in the house and play all sorts of games. And there are several that are along those lines that I've made other people play. I guess it's time I'm subjected to my own medicine.
Right. Okay. So let's make a start then. So, Alexia, you have 30 seconds to defend the following statement. All this critical thinking stuff seems a bit academic. Project management's just about getting stuff done. Discuss.
So I'm to defend that. I absolutely agree. This project management is a mechanism for producing. The whole purpose of project management, the whole definition of a project, is that you are putting something together and producing something at the end. So a project organization is a temporary organization formed to get something accomplished, and that something is your project. So let's see. I can't imagine why you would want to spend your time just sitting around thinking instead of jumping in and just doing, right? That's utterly ridiculous. You just need to keep moving, go forward, get the thing accomplished, and bring in the smartest people in the room while you're at it to do it, so you're not wasting time.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot for that. I could see it was through gritted teeth. It was excellent. Back to you, Dale.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Alexia, for being such a fantastic sport. It's a bit of fun we have at the end of the pod, and it's always great to throw these ridiculous statements out there, particularly when it's opposite to what our guests are really passionate about, and see how they fare. And you did fantastically well. So thank you for that. It's been an amazing time spent with you, and I'm sure there's plenty more, and we'd love to have you back because you've even if it's just to talk about some of your recipes. Is there anything that this lady hasn't done? There's so much to you. So
I can say there's plenty I have not done, and each day brings something new. So at my ripe old age, I am 52. I have just learned how to roller skate over the holidays.
Wow.
Oh wow. That's great. Roller skating is so much fun.
It is. No, that's fantastic. And as we head to the end of the pod, Alexia, I just want to come to you for any final thoughts, words of wisdom that you want to leave our listeners with.
I'd say keep doing what you're doing. I love your podcast. I think you have fabulous guests. I know from PM Chat and my own professional institution conferences that it can be tough to keep something running, for a good long time, but keep at it. You guys are doing a really great job.
Brilliant. Thank you. And it's thanks to guests like yourself. So we really, really
Absolutely.
appreciate that. Val, any final thoughts from yourself?
No, I got your name right, Alexia. So that was fantastic at the start of the pod. It was great to have you on board. keep doing what you're doing. The PM chat sounds awesome. We're going to get involved. I'll have to teach Dale how to do Twitter, but we'll get in there. We'd love to support you and promote what the good work you're doing. You're an inspiration, and thanks for your time and effort on the pod today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks, Val. Just before we go, we have one more surprise for you, Alexia. If you are willing, we have a pop quiz called Tenor, which is 10 questions and answers. And if you're willing, we'd love to take you through that.
Considering I don't think I did well on the last one, I'm willing to give the next one a go.
Fantastic. And you'll do much better because it's all about you. Over to you, Martin.
Oh, no, it's all about me. Oh, God.
Yep. So as Dale said, 10 quickfire questions, all about yourself. So yeah, if you're ready, let's make a start.
Ready. Yes, I am game.
Okay, number one. What's your morning routine?
Oh, take the dogs out. First thing. Absolutely first thing. Brush my teeth, take a shower. That first shower is the most invigorating part of the day. If it's the right weather out, go for a swim before the shower. So yeah, that's get up early. I'm an early bird. I absolutely cannot function in the evening. Val, honestly, if I were you, I'd be asleep right now.
Okay, number two. How do you usually plan out your day?
I am a list maker. I am a huge list maker, and I admit to being, I admit to a tendency to do the easy things first, just because it makes me feel accomplished. And then half the time, those things that I considered to be so difficult, the ones I procrastinated on, they always end up taking 10 or 15 minutes, not nearly the amount of angst I was expecting. So I'm a list maker. That's how I plan my day.
Good answer. I think most of our guests this series have been list makers as well. So interesting. Must be something about project controls. Who knows? Okay, number three. How do you deal with stress?
I swim.
Nice.
Yep, there's that answer. I swim. Although I was, someone I was working with the other day asked me she said she watched me on a conference call stress out in real time. She said, I've never seen anybody do that before. I said, well, what on earth did I do? She goes, you had chocolates on your desk. You ate the whole bag. Well, it was there.
Hey, why not? If it's there, it's there to be eaten. Okay, number four. What's your favorite book?
Oh my goodness! I know I'm supposed to say something really inspiring here, but
don't need to.
I am actually a fan of Alice in Wonderland because it can be as frivolous or intellectual as you feel like it. So I actually brought the entire Alice in Wonderland sort of comprehensive volume with me once when I went into surgery, because I figured if the medication was really that good post-surgery, it was going to be a fun read. But if I was bored, I could always read all the historical notes that go with it. That said, right now I am cruising my way through a series of, I think it's 5 books. I forget the exact title and the author, but it's something about an invisible library, and it is frivolous and fun, and I fall asleep with my face in it every night.
Nice. Very good. Great. Okay. Number 5. Who is your hero and why?
Who is my hero? I've never had a good answer for that. The standard answer I always gave in school was that it was my dad, because I looked up to him so much. He's so brilliant, and he is charming on a scale that should be illegal. So I absolutely look up to him, still do, and he is still dangerously charming. But I've learned to cope. I feel sorry for other people he unleashes that charm on, really. But I'm going to go with the politically correct answer and say all the accomplished women and scholars who have come ahead of me.
Good answer. All round. Okay, number 6. What is your favorite sound?
Piano.
Yeah.
Piano.
You play?
I had 13 or so years of piano lessons. I was a competitive pianist up through college, and then I had a devastating fall and shattered a hand. So now I'm trying to pick it back up again. The hand's fully functional now, but it wasn't for a while. And I am trying to change my knowledge of piano. I have always been a classical pianist. I have always studied rigorously the works of the masters to try to achieve some sort of perfection. And there wasn't much interpretation there. And there was absolutely no ad-libbing or really creativeness there. So I'm trying to tap now into the creativeness of music. And so, of course, you know, being me, I've picked up a bunch of books on the mathematics of music and music and physics in a hope that maybe that'll give me a shove in the right direction.
Wow,
maybe
fascinating.
maybe an algorithm that'll cough up a fabulous piano piece. I don't know.
Decent. Okay, great. Next, what is the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
On a project, I once failed to read the documentation on something important, and held out for a while with an opinion that was unsubstantiated, and then had to eat crow and apologize. Yes. Humility.
Swallow pride there. Yeah, good life lesson.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of those learned early in my career, so it wasn't terribly devastating. I think I got away with being young on that one.
Get it out of the way early. That's a good thing. Okay, next. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Oh, we were just about to do. We're about to do this as a PM chat topic, actually. What would you tell your younger self? I am blessed. I don't have children of my own, but I do have a good number of godchildren. And so I am blessed right now to have a teenage godchild. And she is the recipient of all sorts of knowledge that she might not have expected to learn. But I think I would tell my 10-year-old self to stop worrying about everybody else and just be me. Although I think I'm a lot to handle as is, and I learned that fairly late in life to be me. So imagine what would have happened if I learned that younger. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Right, almost there. So number 9, what profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
Easy. I wanted to be a Shakespeare scholar.
Well,
wow.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to be a Shakespeare scholar, and I believe my mom put her foot down and said, "You will study one of the sciences or else." And she said she didn't need me being a starving writer, something along those lines. So, but you know, the timing was, let's see, 1986 in London. The timing was perfect for Shakespeare scholarship. That was right at the beginning of a really good wave of scholars in that area.
Did you get to the Shakespeare's Globe while you were in London?
I think we were members of the National Theatre, and so we had gone certainly to Shakespeare's birthplace, and we had attended plays there, Royal Shakespeare Company and all this. But the rebuilding of the Globe, I don't believe occurred until later.
Yeah, it was 98,
right.
I think. Yeah,
Yep.
I just missed it. So, shame.
So
okay.
I would like to go back and do that, but I am very fortunate here within I don't know, maybe an overnight trip sort of distance is the American Shakespeare Company. And so we've been lucky that they've had a number of productions that they've moved to online, and also they've been streaming their live productions. So it's been great. I've also been to the Oregon Shakespeare Theater in, well, I forget, was it Utah or Oregon? I've been to both of those. And so, yeah, I'm a fan.
Oh, yeah, I could tell. It's quite the
Literally,
passion.
I would sit down with Shakespeare sonnets and a thesaurus, because with many of Shakespeare's sonnets, you can, depending on the way you read it, it can mean 2 or 3 things. And so I would take each sonnet and break it down using a thesaurus into 2 or 3 other ways that it could be read. And then I would rewrite it in iambic pentameter. I got straight A's in English.
See why now? Great.
I should have kept them. I just tossed them. Oh, God.
Oh, that's a really good passion there. Okay, right, so we're on to the last one now. If you had to spend $1 million in a day, what would you spend it on?
What's the legal limit on dogs?
I think it's gone up in the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sure I should do something smart, like invest part, donate part, and be frivolous with part. That's the logical thing. But if I were to be illogical, it would probably, yeah, it would be dogs.
Nice.
There's 3 right now, literally snoring right here. They've heard all my BS before. They're just.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. As Val was saying, Dr. Alexia, it has been so great to have you on the podcast, and we would definitely love to have you back for a part 2. So folks, that is all the time we have on this episode, but it doesn't have to stop here. Support our charities and access blogs at projectchatterpodcast.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel and your favorite podcast player so you don't miss the next one. A massive, massive thank you to our guest, Dr. Alexia Nalewaik, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.